All right, good evening. We have another breakdown video. Um, this is Bob Kerrey of the 9/11 Commission interviewing Bush Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. Let's see what they have to say.
My favorite witness ever.
Thank you.
I would, first of all, like to know how many cars it took to get all you guys over here. It's a big group. Let me just read back to you what you said 20 years ago, Mr. Secretary, that simply standing in a defensive position absorbing blows is not enough, that terrorism must be deterred. And I say with great respect, it seems to me, up to the 11th September, we were standing in a defensive position taking blows. I'm going to give you the same line that I gave former Secretary Cohen when he was here earlier.
And I'm going to give you the same answers. I thought he did a good job.
All right, well, we'll see if they're the same answers. It wasn't just that we were attacked on the 11th September, Mr. Secretary. It's the same group of people that hit the Cole on the 12th of October, same group of people that tried to hit the Sullivans a few months before that, the same group of people that were responsible for millennium attacks against the United States that we had interrupted, and in Jordan, the same group of people that hit our East African embassy bombings on the 7th of August, and we now believe the same group of people are responsible for other attacks against the United States. This was an army led by Osama bin Laden who declared war on us on the 23rd of February, 1998. And we had all kinds of reasons, I've heard them all, and they're all wonderful, as to why the only military attack we had was a single attack on the 20th of August, 1998, and other than that, there wasn't anything.
A little bit of background. That was a response by the Clinton White House in regards to the 1998 East Africa bombings. Now, there was a meeting of the principals regarding the CIA, the DIA, the Pentagon, on how to respond. Bin Laden wanted a full-scale invasion into Afghanistan. Later on, his son, Hamza bin Laden, would later state that, this is after bin Laden's death in 2011, was that bin Laden had anticipated Clinton to overreact and to have the military engage the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, as did the Soviets with the Mujahideen in 1979 to 1989 in Afghanistan. But Clinton did not. In fact, what he did was send a couple of Tomahawk missiles to the Al Farouk training camp. I forgot the name of the camp that took a heavy loss. It was an Al Qaeda training camp in Afghanistan, southern Afghanistan, and the Al Shifa Pharmaceutical Center in Sudan. And basically, this was the only response. And bin Laden grew bolder and said that he was surprised that the United States, even after their embassies were bombed and hundreds were killed, they didn't respond in kind. And bin Laden would later say that's when they took the fighting inside the United States instead of outside of it, in the hopes of engaging them or pulling their military into a long, drawn-out war, just like the Soviets. And he got that wish after 9/11. Now, the conspiracy is, were there intelligence warnings regarding the East Africa bombings? Yes, there were. I did a whole video on this. You could look it up on my video page, intelligence prior to the Africa bombings. Prudence Bushnell, who is the Kenyan US Ambassador, basically implored the White House to beef up security. And they went and they looked and they said there were some security lapses. And then after a while, they basically ignored it. And then on August 7th, 1998, 2 embassies were bombed in Kenya and Tanzania. 9/11, even worse, because there was a ton of intelligence regarding Al-Qaeda operatives and bin Laden wanting to attack inside the United States, and they were all ignored.
And 19 men as a consequence. Defeated us utterly with less than $500,000. And I ask you, wouldn't a declaration of war, either by President Clinton or President Bush prior to this, not just to go after bin Laden, But to say the DOD, the CIA, and other agencies, you got to work together. You got to put together a terrorist list of radical Islamists that we believe are connected to these things and prevent them from coming in the United States of America. You got to make sure you consider all options and possibilities that might be used against us. You said you received no specific intelligence about the possibility of a plane being used as a bomb. But Mr. Secretary,
That's not true. I mean, and I think Kerry's going to wreck him here. We have, and I stated this in other breakdown videos where this has come up, there were reports that they wanted to use planes as weapons, and to go as far back as, you know, the early 1990s, when the Abu Nidal organization had allegedly met with bin Laden. In 1996, it was found out through the Pajinka plot, through the interrogation of one of the plotters, Abdul Hakim Murad, that there was a hidden plot inside this multifaceted plot of the Pajinka plot, where there was sleeper cells inside the United States learning to fly at flight schools. So this report was passed on to the FBI, and according to Director Free, Louis Free, this was actually passed on to the FAA, which I don't know if they did get it, or that they just didn't really pay much attention to it, but nothing was done with the intelligence.
you're well known as somebody who thinks about all kinds of terrible possibilities that might happen that nobody else is thinking about. I mean, that's what you do so well when you're going into a difficult situation. I mean, it seems to me that a declaration of war, either by President Clinton or by President Bush, prior to 9/11, would have mobilized the government in ways that at least would have reduced substantially the possibility that 9/11 would have happened. Do you agree or not? That's a different question than I gave Secretary Cohen. I'm getting better at this.
It is. I was going to use his answer, and now I can't. Possibly. Let me put it that way. The problem with it sounds good the way you said it. I try to put myself in other people's shoes, and try to put yourself in the shoes of the new administration that had just arrived. And time had passed. We were in the process of bringing people on board, and the president said he wanted a new policy for counterterrorism. Making a declaration of war in February or March or April, for the sake of argument, without having fashioned the policy to follow it up, which they were working on, without having taken the kinds of steps in the Department of Defense to review contingency plans and get them up to date, to get the assumptions current for the 21st century, without having tried to strengthen the special operations forces, it seems to me might have been a bold stroke that would have sounded good, but when not followed up with the kind of capabilities that we were able to follow it up with on October 7th, when we put forces and capabilities into Afghanistan, so it might not have been a great idea. I don't think it would have stopped September 11th.
Well, let me put it this way to you. Let's say that the Federal Aviation Administration had heeded some warnings about the possibility of a hijacking, and had altered the procedures in American airports to prevented these hijackers from being able to get onto the planes in the first place, or had different procedures on the airplanes on the morning of the 11th September to make certain that the pilots were locked up front and that the passengers didn't remain in their seats and cooperate. Let's say, please, let's say that 9/11 hadn't happened. Would you have gone to the American people and carried out the strategy that you say you worked on all year long and you came up with on the 4th of September? Because the president had to go to the American people and said, we're going to work to eliminate the al-Qaeda network. We're going to use all elements of national power to do so, diplomatic, military, economic, intel, information, law enforcement, and we're going to eliminate sanctuaries for al-Qaeda and related terrorist networks, and if diplomatic efforts fail to do so, we're going to consider additional measures. Now, earlier in your testimony, you said all the reasons why to do such a thing would provoke angry response. Would the administration have put this policy in place were it not for 9/11?
I believe we would have. Okay, one can't announce that for certainty because 9/11 happened, but it had been worked on, developed, and was ready to go into place.
Well, then doesn't
In June and July, when the intelligence spike took place, there were a good number of steps that were taken. My responsibilities, as you know, were overseas, not domestically. But forces were alerted, embassies were alerted, as Secretary Powell indicated today. There were a number of steps taken by the Transportation Department with respect to airlines and cautions and warnings there. So it's not as though the intelligence that was gathering had not been understood and addressed, and a great number of steps in addition to the development of the policy.
Well, I
taken.
gotta say, Mr. Secretary,
Let me stop right here for a second. The Clinton administration was much more concentrated or paid attention to the threat of Arab fundamentalism. The one saving grace of the Clinton administration regarding the economic strength of the country at the time. But later on, he would destroy it through the NAFTA agreement, but that's a whole nother argument. But there was at least some discussions about assassinating Osama bin Laden in the early 1990s, while he was living in Sudan, Khartoum specifically. The CIA brought forth a couple of proposals, and it was all rejected by the Clinton administration. At least the Clinton administration had Richard Clark, he headed the National Security Counterterrorism Center under both Clinton and Bush administrations. He would have a seat, a primary seat at the principals meetings, but that wasn't the case under the Bush administration. The Bush administration didn't want nothing to do really with Arab fundamentalism. And Richard Clark tried to brief the president about al-Qaeda as soon as he took office, and Condoleezza Rice shot him down each and every time. They were focused on China, and they were focused on Iraq. They were not focused on al-Qaeda and bin Laden. Now, in the last weeks of the Clinton administration, there was what we called the Blue Sky Memo, which basically was a Central Intelligence Agency document outlining that if the CIA didn't have any legal financial restraints to restrict them from doing illegal operations, that is to say, if the sky was blue. And the memorandum itself was inspired by the USS Cole attack in October of 2000. And I'll read the quote from the 9/11 Commission report, and I want to say it was chapter 6. Quote, no action was taken on these ideas in the few remaining weeks of the Clinton administration. National Security Advisor Sandy Berger under the Clinton administration did not recall seeing or being briefed on the Blue Sky Memo, nor was the memo discussed during the transition with incoming top Bush administration officials. CIA Director Tenet and his deputy told us they pressed these ideas as options after the new administration took office. Well, the CIA knew about the severity of the bin Laden threat, but the Bush administration did not. It doesn't help when the CIA doesn't become forthcoming with their intelligence, which could prevent, say, 9/11 from happening, when they don't share pertinent information with the FBI or with the State Department regarding al-Qaeda operatives living inside the United States. So you can see there's a problem here. So the problem isn't just the Bush administration neglecting to take serious about al-Qaeda. It's also CIA for not being forthcoming with sharing information. It's also the NSA who's not forthcoming with sharing information to the CIA or the FBI, and vice versa. You know, all these agencies who are supposed to be, you would think, if you were naive enough to believe it, that everyone's on the same page, because, you know, the defense of lives, American lives, are at stake. Well, they can give a shit. As you can see, 9/11 happened when it didn't have to. It didn't have to.
That's the case, and I trust you. you, I believe you on this point, then I don't think it's a good argument to say that the American people wouldn't have accepted something prior to 9/11 that was unpopular. Because you just said that absent 9/11, you would have recommended to the president to put in place a policy that would have been exceptionally unpopular and difficult to sell. I believe he should have, by the way, regardless of whether or not 9/11 happened.
This is actually a good point by Kerrey. What would be the, the hypothetical here? What would be the response of the American people had the media and had the State Department press the issue of invading Afghanistan due to the terrorist attacks in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998, right? Would the American people get behind it and nip this threat in the bud, right? Because we did this after the attacks of September 11, 2001. But it took, a spectacular number of people dying, 3,000 people dying. 200 wasn't enough. But I wonder, would the American people get behind it? Now, remember, New Yorkers basically are aware of radical fundamentalism, and that's coming from the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. But Jane Complot was all but ignored, really, to the general public. And really, generally, fundamentally speaking, the American populace knew nothing, including yours truly, about Arab fundamentalism or who Osama bin Laden was. I'm not even going to get into Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri or Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, right? Just Osama bin Laden in general. But we didn't know anything about this person. Now, if what Kerrey says here, would it came to fruition, I happen to think that people would have said, hey, this is a threat. We need to take care of it. If they kept playing bin Laden, was going to strike the United States when John Miller went and interviewed bin Laden, and bin Laden said, we're at war with the United States. Yeah, we probably would have gotten behind it.
But it doesn't work. The argument falls on its face if you say, please understand we could have done this before 9/11, if you say you would have done it absent 9/11.
I understand.
All right. Let me say, Dr. Rice has said that the national security team was briefed on the threat of al-Qaeda and transition, and that it was well understood. This is what she said in the Washington Post yesterday. It was well understood by the president and his national security team, the principal. In the interview that we did with you seemed not to be as clear as Dr. Rice was, or at least Secretary Powell was. And by the way, I'm very sympathetic to that, given that the Department of Defense did not have that kind of authority over counterterrorism activities. So perhaps that would be the reason you were not. But in the interview, you indicated that you didn't recall that briefing. And in your testimony, you also referenced, and I'd love to hear that even you have moments that you forget. You were at a briefing and people were telling you something. Do you recall the briefings on al-Qaeda by Secretary Cohen? And
Secretary Cohen commented on it today. We did have one or two meetings. He had a long list of items. There must have been 40 or 50 plus items. I have given it to the committee. The first item was one that concerned him the most, and it involved a sensitive item that was very much on his mind, that was terrorism related, but to my recollection, not al-Qaeda related.
It seems to me that Dr. Rice is overstating the case a bit in that statement, saying that the threat of al-Qaeda was well understood by the president and his entire national security team.
I don't think that's an overstatement. I mean, certainly the people in the administration who came in didn't arrive out of cellophane packages.
But you didn't get a briefing by the Counterterrorism Security Group, nor by SOLEC?
I did not get a briefing that Secretary Powell got, no. I was...
Yeah, listen, again, like I said, the Bush administration were acknowledging that al-Qaeda it did exist, but did they take it seriously? Of course not. I mean, read the books by Richard Clarke, Against All Enemies, Scott Horton, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, Ali Soufan, The Black Banners, Ray Nowolski, The Watchdogs Didn't Bark, Kevin Fenton, Disconnecting the Dots, and of course, Paul Thompson's Terror Timeline. Time and time again, these phenomenal authors have related to the public about and this is for the historical record because that their books are heavily referenced and have footnotes, lots of footnotes, where the State Department under the Bush administration gave no strict attention to Osama bin Laden or Al Qaeda during the years 2000 and 2001, even when the summer of 2001, the spring of 2001, when foreign intelligence was awash with the intelligence community worldwide regarding bin Laden and his wish to strike inside the United States. The infamous August 7th, 2001 presidential daily brief entitled bin Laden to strike inside the US. Now, when Condoleezza Rice actually testified and then was interviewed by the 9/11 Commission, she was not being honest when she said, I think the memo was saying bin Laden determined to strike the United States, which is a little bit different because you could basically say, oh, we didn't get any specific information about him coming to the United States where we could have vamped security. Well, that wasn't the case because the memo said to strike inside the US.
Briefed by members of the Joint
Because
Staff
nobody-
and other
because
people in
nobody-
the policy departments of the Department of Defense.
Let me stop it here. Because nobody wants to be held accountable for their malfeasance. And nobody was. Not by any of the congressional inquiries.
Dr. Rice also said that she wasn't satisfied with the off-the-shelf military response options that were available after the Cole, the so-called tit-for-tat options that I think she was referring to 20 August 1998 against the camps in Afghanistan. Did she ask for military options, or were there military options requested during your term? Because our investigation shows that there were no new military plans developed against Al Qaeda or bin Laden prior to September 11th.
I think it's accurate to say, General Myers, you may want to chime in here, but I think it's accurate to say that there were military options, and I characterize it as options and not a comprehensive plan to deal with Al Qaeda and countries that harbor Al Qaeda, but options to react, response options, military response options to deal with specific terrorist events. And I was briefed on them, as I indicated in my testimony, and I suspect that Dr. Rice was briefed on them. I can just say that I don't remember ever seeing, in the first instance, I don't remember anyone being briefed on military proposals to react to something where they were fully satisfied, nor do I ever remember military people being fully satisfied with the intelligence available. That's the nature of the world we live in. Dick, do you want to come in?
Well, I would just add that we did, after the Cole, continue some of the planning that had gone on before, since 98, actually, and developed some additional options. I think we briefed the committee on those, or at least the staff.
That's why I'm confused when the National Security Advisor in the Post says that we didn't have an Al Qaeda plan. No plan was given to the new administration on how to deal with Al Qaeda, and then she goes on to say that was not satisfied with the off-the-shelf options that were available, and especially in the second case, we don't see any evidence that during the Bush administration there were any new requests that came to DOD asking for new military options. If there was dissatisfaction with the National Security Advisor, you would think she would have sent a request over for alternative military options.
First of all, my recollection is that Sandy Berger has agreed with Dr. Rice that a plan for the Al Qaeda was not handed from one administration to the other. And second, my understanding is that the Joint Staff, after I was briefed and asked a lot of questions, went back down and continued working on those response plans throughout that period, and that was one of the reasons why we were in a position to respond so promptly after September 11th. Is that true?
That's correct.
Well, I said it to Secretary Powell earlier, but I'm going to say to you as well, Mr. Secretary, I don't understand this "we're waiting for a plan" thing at all. I really don't. I mean, God, we're dealing with an individual who's led a military effort against the United States for 10 years and has serially killed a significant number of Americans over that period of time.
let me just chime in for a little bit here. The response, the key to 9/11 was the lack of a strong response by the Clinton administration during the East Africa bombings. Now, the operation was called Infinite Reach. On the day of the embassy bombings, Sandy Berger, then the national security advisor under Clinton, advised the president about the bombings. And Clinton met with a very small group of people, which was Director George Tenet of the CIA, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, the Attorney General Janet Reno, John O'Neill of the FBI, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Hugh Shelton, talking about a response to the Bin Laden group, Al Qaeda, regarding what happened in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi. And this meeting was held by the principals on August 10th, in which they decided to use Tomahawk missiles for the strikes. Now, I got the camp right. It was Al Farouk, which is based in Khost, Afghanistan. So, but it wasn't enough. Now, here's the thing. The chief of station at the Bin Laden issue station, codename Alex Station, Michael Scheuer, proposed that they assassinate Bin Laden one day when he was meeting with Yemeni princes one time. And Clark basically argued against, because we were just tying strong relations with Yemen, and Yemen is a hotspot for Al Qaeda. Scheuer was adamant, saying that he's actually there. We could use a drone predator. So that they passed the buck. The CIA, they passed it to the CIA. The CIA says, we're not an assassination unit. That changed in, just a few short days after September 11, 2001, where they finally authorized the CIA a kill list, personally a kill list. It had like 100 names on it. And they went to the Pentagon. Pentagon says, well, we don't know how to use the drone predator program. We just started under the Clinton administration. Nobody wanted to partake on this effort, and it was shut down basically because the risk was too great to damage a Yemeni relationship. It's not the first time that bin Laden was targeted for assassination by the CIA in the mid-90s and the early 1990s, because some of these operations that Clinton was proposing, like having a Black Hawk helicopter go to Afghanistan, where bin Laden was staying under guard and protection from the Taliban, to then parachute on down and just rendition him. And Hugh Shelton, who's a tough as nails general of the Army, who's now the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he basically says, these people are living in movie land. It's not how this works. He's under guard of like 100 Taliban fighters, not to mention Al Qaeda. And basically it would be a massive firefight involving, hundreds of troops involved with this, situation. The risks are too great for, the cost of lives. For a guy, even with the embassy bombings under his belt, who basically, wasn't to be taken serious, but he was taken serious after the embassy bombings, and he was definitely taken serious after 9/11, even though he wasn't the main organizer of it. He just participated at some level in it. Financing, I think, anyway. And if we believe the story, take it with a grain of salt, because it came through torture that he selected the pilots for that operation. Nevertheless, this goes to show you how of a disconnect it is between the intelligence services and the White House regarding what to do with the threat of bin Laden and Al Qaeda and how to treat the threat. With Clinton, at least they treated it semi-seriously. With Bush, well, not at all. And the response by the White House and the intelligence community, where the intelligence community basically did try to kill bin Laden, and it was rejected each time, this goes to show you that there were many times where we had proper information where we could have killed bin Laden in the early 90s. We had proper information about attacks that were going to happen at the East Africa bombings and 9/11 months, many months prior to both events. And God knows what else the NSA had collected regarding the wiretaps of bin Laden's satellite phone and an Al-Qaeda communications hub in Yemen. If only we could see what they heard, what was talking about on those phones.
And why in God's name I got to wait 8 months to get a plan? I mean, I'm very sympathetic to the part that you mentioned. I mean, Paul wasn't on board, I guess, till March, and lots of other, your last appointment, I think you had in your testimony wasn't there, your key appointment wasn't there till August or something like that. I'm very sympathetic to all the difficulties of transition, but it still, I still get in my head, why do we need a brand new military, a full-blown plan like we're building a house or something here?
Well, let me just make one comment, and maybe someone else would like to respond, but Afghanistan was harboring the Al-Qaeda. Afghanistan was something like 8,000 miles from the United States. It was surrounded by countries that were not particularly friendly to the United States of America.
I wonder why, right? Pakistan, Iraq. You have to look at your own past to understand why certain countries in present day have a vitriol for the American government.
Afghanistan, as I said publicly on one occasion, didn't have a lot of targets. I mean, you can go from an overhead and attack Afghanistan, and in a very short order, you run out of targets that are lucrative. You can pound the rubble in an Al-Qaeda training camp 15 times and not do much damage. They can put tents right back up. It's not like the country has suffered for decades in drought, in civil war, in occupation by the Soviet Union, and trying to deal with them from the air, in my view, and that is essentially what the courses of action were that I saw.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary, but you said earlier that even absent 9/11, your strategy would have been to eliminate the Al-Qaeda network, to use all the elements of national power to do so, to eliminate the sanctuaries for Al-Qaeda and related terrorist networks. I appreciate that. Is it a tough mission? Yes. But your declaratory earlier was that you'd carry that out even absent 9/11.
And I would say that that's one of the reasons that Secretary Powell and I and others in the department, in the government, spent time connecting with countries in that part of the world in ways that were unusual and distinctly different than had been the case previously from the very first day of the administration.
Again, funny, I don't get it with, some of these people and how they basically can just, fabricate or create a history that doesn't exist. They fabricate scenarios where their own mind, oh yeah, well, we would have dealt with the Al-Qaeda problem absent of a terrorist event like September 11, 2001. You had your chance. And this is before the Bush administration. This is during the Clinton administration where they could have destroyed bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. They didn't do it, right? The Bush administration had their chance to deal with Al-Qaeda and bin Laden. They did not allow Richard Clark, to brief them on the seriousness of Al-Qaeda, not just in Afghanistan, but also in Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula, as well as here inside the United States. The CIA certainly did. The NSA certainly did. The Israelis, the Saudis certainly did. They were inside the United States monitoring these people many years prior. Heck, you want to go even before that? Robert Wright Jr., a Chicago FBI agent during an operation called Volga Betrayal. I've done a video about this as well, where it was basically targeting Hamas and Hezbollah operatives inside the United States, right? But in his operation, they found that Al-Qaeda operatives were inside the United States and that they had connections with a number of um, very influential Islamic charities or organizations inside the United States. One of them was the Holy Land Foundation, which later on were exonerated from having any connections with the September 11th attacks, and they didn't really. Now, did some money flow to some of these terrorists? Yeah, I mean, but they deal with the majority of the Muslim public who are not terrorists. So who knows? Now the shady businesses that were dealing with these radical fundamentalists in the full knowledge of the FBI. We're monitoring these people. Now, Robert Wright Jr., who blew the whistle on this, got in trouble, basically was called a renegade, and, from his own agency, no less. And we show, I mean, when Louis Freeh, who's a strong friend to King Fahd, the Saudi king of Arabia at the time, the Khobar Towers bombing, where the FBI was basically trying to investigate that. They were basically circumvented, under constant pressure by the Saudi government, who were warning their civilians not to cooperate with the FBI because their connections with the Bin Laden family and their sympathizers for the Bin Laden Al Qaeda group. So, all right, that's it for this breakdown video, and see you in the next one.